All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Looks like we've got a really juicy topic on our hands today. Jealousy.
Oh, yeah, definitely a big one. And you all have really outdone yourselves with the sources this time. We've got, well, let's see, there's stuff from like a spiritual teacher on YouTube, a Buddhist perspective, a self-help angle, even a TEDx talk. Someone even sent in a sermon.
And a really thoughtful written article, too. So basically, we've got all angles covered, huh?
Yep. It seems like everyone's got some experience with this green-eyed monster, so let's really get into it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, who hasn't felt that twinge of jealousy at some point, right? So today, we're going to try to understand this whole jealousy thing inside and out. We'll look at where it comes from, how it impacts us, and the most important part, we'll try to figure out how to deal with it in a way that doesn't leave us feeling, completely overwhelmed.
That's right. Because it can get pretty intense.
Totally.
Mm-hmm.
And, while we're going through all these sources, there were definitely some eye-opening moments, some things that made me think, oh, wow, I never thought about it like that before.
Definitely.
We'll be talking about, well, first off, is there something about us humans that, makes us hardwired to compare ourselves to others? Then there's this whole idea of a jealousy career. And we can't forget the concept of mudita, a really beautiful idea from Buddhism. And, of course, the whole social media trap. Those picture-perfect lives that can make us feel like we're not measuring up.
Oh, yeah. That's a big one these days.
Huge. So, okay, before we go any further, let's start with the basics. What exactly are we talking about when we say jealousy? How do our sources define this thing?
Well, the main takeaway seems to be that jealousy pops up when we think someone else has something that we want. Like, it could be anything, really, success in their work, strong relationships, money, talent, maybe even just how they look.
Basically, that feeling of like, hey, why do they have that and I don't?
Exactly. Like you're getting the short end of the stick somehow.
Right. And there's this one TEDx talk by Ali Hendry that I thought was really insightful. She pointed out that we use jealousy and envy as if they mean the same thing, but there's actually a difference.
Oh, yeah. That was a good one.
So jealousy is more about the fear of losing something you already have, like someone else might take it from you. Envy, on the other hand, is just plain wanting what someone else has.
That's a great point. And she mentions how some languages just have one word for both.
Which is interesting, right? Like, maybe it's not always so clear-cut in our own experience either.
Totally. And of course, we can't forget the classic image of the green-eyed monster. That's how the Buddhists describe jealousy. It's such a powerful metaphor, right? It's like this primal force that can take over.
It can be all-consuming.
Yeah, for sure. And BK Shivani brought up something I hadn't considered before. We often think that jealousy is mostly about people who, maybe don't have as much. But she actually suggests that even those who seem to have it all can experience jealousy too.
Like those at the very top.
Exactly. For them, it's more about staying on top, the constant pressure to not lose their position, to remain number one.
So it's almost like a different kind of jealousy.
Yeah, I think so. And it makes you think, right? Even when you reach the top, there's still this fear of falling behind. It's a bit unsettling.
Definitely gives you something to think about.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're starting to get a clearer picture of what jealousy is, but let's dive into the why. What's at the root of all this? Why do we humans experience jealousy in the first place?
Well, from a psychological perspective, a lot of it comes down to, well, insecurity, that deep down feeling of not being good enough. Like when we see someone else succeeding, it can trigger this fear that we're somehow falling short.
Yeah, it can really hit that self-esteem nerve, can it?
Oh, absolutely. And the written article had this really interesting point about our brains being wired to compare ourselves to others.
So it's like built in, this comparing thing.
It seems that way. And they even suggest it could be evolutionary. Like way back when, we had to constantly assess our standing within a group to survive. Figure out where we fit in the hierarchy.
Interesting. So this isn't just some modern-day problem. It's something we might have inherited from our ancestors.
Right. But these days, instead of worrying about, who gets the biggest piece of mammoth meat, it's more about things like our careers, relationships, how much money we have, that kind of stuff.
So it's the same drive, just playing out in different ways.
Yeah, exactly. And psychology says that there's a strong link between jealousy and low self-esteem, low self-worth. If we don't feel secure in ourselves, other people's successes can feel like a direct attack on our own sense of worth.
Like it's confirming our worst fears about ourselves.
In a way, yeah. And the written article also talked about cognitive distortions, those mental tricks we play on ourselves. where we end up exaggerating other people's achievements and downplaying our own.
Oh, yeah, I think we've all been there.
Definitely.
And it's hard to talk about comparison without mentioning the elephant in the room. Social media.
Oh, yeah. Social media is a whole other beast.
Right. It can be a breeding ground for jealousy.
Totally. Both the written article and Stephen Furtick's sermon really highlight how much social media distorts our perception of reality. It's all these perfectly curated snippets of other people's lives, exotic vacations, amazing jobs, perfect families, expensive stuff. It's like everyone's just showing their highlight reel. And then we compare that to our own, well, less glamorous everyday lives, and it's easy to feel like we're not measuring up.
And it's hard not to compare, right? You're constantly bombarded with these seemingly perfect lives.
And Furtick calls them cropped realities because that's what they are. We're only seeing a tiny slice of someone's life, the parts they choose to show us. We don't see the struggles, the sacrifices, the behind-the-scenes stuff. It's like looking at a perfectly staged photo shoot and then feeling bad because your messy living room doesn't measure up.
So basically, we're setting ourselves up for disappointment because we're comparing ourselves to something that's not even real.
Pretty much, yeah. And the written article pointed out something else, social and family pressures, like fitting in with your peers, especially when you're younger, can fuel a lot of comparison and jealousy.
Oh, for sure.
And then you've got those well-meaning parents who make those classic comparisons. Why can't you be more like your sister? Or your cousin just got into Harvard. What are you doing with your life?
Ouch. That can sting.
Right. And the article also talks about how sibling rivalry, those early childhood battles, can be like a training ground for dealing with jealousy.
Yeah, I think we can all relate to that.
And then there are our own personal experiences, like when we feel like we're not living up to our own expectations or maybe facing setbacks in our careers, relationships, whatever. It's easy to get stuck in this feeling of everyone else is moving ahead and I'm just stuck. That's what they call status anxiety in the article.
Yeah, like you're stuck in neutral while everyone else is speeding ahead.
Exactly. And finally, there's the whole thing about luck and destiny. It can be tempting to look at someone who seems to effortlessly succeed and think, well, they're just lucky, I could never do that. But the written article cautions against using this as an excuse to avoid taking responsibility for our own lives.
So it's about recognizing that external factors might play a role, but ultimately we have to own our choices.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got a good grasp on what jealousy is and where it comes from. Now let's talk about the downsides. What happens when we don't handle this feeling in a healthy way?
Well, B.K. Shivani has this great analogy about two families driving in their cars. They're both enjoying the scenery, having a good time. But then one driver gets this thought, I need to get ahead of that other car. And that's when everything changes. The focus shifts from enjoying the ride to winning the race, and suddenly there's stress, frustration, maybe even anger. They might even start breaking traffic laws just to get ahead.
And in the process, they lose sight of why they were on the road in the first place.
Exactly. And she applies the same logic to life in general. She says that this need to constantly go ahead of others can make us compromise our values. Like we might start doing things we wouldn't normally do just to get that competitive edge.
So it can actually lead us down a pretty slippery slope.
It can. We might start lying, cheating, maybe even sabotaging others, and that's where things get really messy.
And the damage goes way beyond just not achieving what we set out to achieve, right?
Absolutely. Shivani talks about how acting from this place of jealousy can actually weaken us. It diminishes what she calls soul power, our inner strength and integrity. And she says it creates negative karmic accounts, meaning actions that lead to future unhappiness.
So even if we do manage to get ahead, there's a price to pay.
Right. And Sadhguru also touches on this point. He asks whether those driving expensive cars in a traffic jam are truly happy. Like, having all that material success doesn't necessarily mean you're fulfilled inside.
It's a good reminder that outward success isn't always a reflection of how we feel on the inside.
Definitely. And Shivani also points out that this whole competition thing doesn't just apply to work or material possessions. It can creep into our personal relationships, too.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, she talks about mothers-in-law and daughters-in-law, husbands and wives, even siblings. Like, that need to always be number one can infect even our closest relationships.
So it's like this pattern that can repeat itself in different areas of our lives.
Yeah, exactly. And she calls it a sanskar, a deep-rooted habit that's hard to break. It can even pop up in spiritual communities, like those who are always trying to be the best volunteer. Maybe they're secretly driven by this need to be seen as superior.
Wow. It's amazing how pervasive this can be. It's like we need to be constantly on guard.
It's a lot to be aware of, that's for sure.
Okay, so It seems like we could all use some tools for dealing with this jealousy thing in a healthier way. What did our sources have to say about that?
Well, both the Buddhist teachings and Lana Blakely emphasize the importance of self-awareness. It's about being honest with ourselves and acknowledging when we're feeling jealous without immediately judging ourselves for it. Like Ali Hendry says in her TEDx talk, you feel jealousy, it doesn't define you. So step one is just recognizing the feeling.
So it's about saying, okay, I'm feeling jealous right now, and then taking a breath instead of letting it take over.
Exactly. Then it's about reframing how we think about comparison. The Buddhist perspective encourages us to see that every person is unique and on their own journey. They compare it to the four elements, earth, air, fire, water. They're all different and serve different purposes. You can't really compare them, right?
Right, they're all essential in their own way.
Exactly. And they say we should be competing with ourselves, not with others, striving to be better than we were yesterday rather than trying to be better than someone else.
So it's about focusing on our own growth rather than getting caught up in what everyone else is doing.
Exactly. The written article also highlighted the power of gratitude, appreciating what we do have instead of fixating on what we lack. And along with that, setting clear personal goals, having something to strive for that's meaningful to us.
So basically creating our own path instead of constantly looking over at someone else's.
Exactly. And then, of course, there's the whole social media thing. Several of our sources suggest limiting our exposure to those perfectly curated online lives.
Because, as we talked about earlier, those cropped realities can really mess with our heads.
They can. And Stephen Furtick reminds us that we rarely see the full picture. Like, someone might have 16 Grammys, but 5 ex-wives, We only see the success, not the potential costs. And he uses this analogy of comparing our lobby to someone else's kitchen. Like, we're comparing different parts of our lives, and it doesn't make sense. He also talks about Joshua succeeding Moses. Joshua built on what Moses had done, but he also had his own vision and his own path to follow.
So it's about honoring the past without feeling like we have to replicate it exactly.
Right. And Lana Blakely has this great perspective on acceptance. She says that, life can be unfair. Some people just have it easier than others. Maybe they're just plain lucky. And trying to find flaws in them to make ourselves feel better doesn't really work in the long run. Instead, she suggests looking at jealousy as information. Like, what is this feeling telling me about what I want?
So it's not about suppressing the feeling, but trying to understand what's behind it.
Right. And there's this Buddhist concept called mudita, which means sympathetic joy. It's about finding genuine happiness in the success of others. Like Lana Blakely talks about acknowledging someone's beauty or good fortune without letting it trigger those negative feelings within ourselves. It's a way to rewire our brains, basically.
So instead of feeling that pang of jealousy, we can actually feel happy for them.
Exactly. And the written article suggests investing in personal development, building our skills, increasing our confidence. The more secure we feel in ourselves, the less threatened we'll feel by other people's successes.
So it's about addressing the root of the problem rather than just trying to manage the symptom.
Yeah, exactly.
And Ali Hendry, in her TEDx talk, offered some really practical tools for dealing with jealousy. She calls it unpacking jealousy.
Oh, yeah. That was really helpful.
So first she says to pay attention to the physical sensations of jealousy in our body, without judging them. Just notice them.
Like, where do you feel it in your body?
Right. And then second, she reminds us that our thoughts aren't necessarily true. Just because we think something doesn't mean it's a fact.
Because sometimes our thoughts can really spiral out of control.
Totally. And finally, she emphasizes the power of choice. We can choose how to respond to this feeling rather than just letting it control us.
And those are all things we can do right now, in the moment.
Right. And to wrap up her talk, Ali Hendry uses this survivor's guide analogy with 3 tools for surviving jealousy. First, there's the candle, representing enlightenment. She suggests writing a letter or recording a voice note to your jealousy, just trying to understand it from a different perspective.
Interesting.
Then there's the thread, which represents time. She suggests setting aside a specific time each day to allow yourself to ruminate on those jealous thoughts. But then when the time's up, move on to something else. And finally, the safety pin, which represents changing your state. Like put on some music and have a little dance party in your kitchen just to shift your energy.
I love that. A kitchen disco. Who wouldn't feel better after that?
Right. So as we wrap up this deep dive into jealousy, what's the main takeaway? What do we want our listeners to remember?
I think the most important thing is that jealousy is a normal human emotion. It's something we all experience at some point. And the more we understand about where it comes from, the better equipped we'll be to deal with it in a healthy way. It's about seeing it as a signal, something we can learn from rather than something to be ashamed of.
Absolutely. And instead of getting stuck in that loop of comparison and resentment, we can shift our focus inward.
Exactly. It's about self-awareness, personal growth, gratitude, and finding our own unique path in life.
So here's a final thought for you, our listener. Think back to a recent time when you felt jealous. Now, using the tools we've discussed, maybe acknowledging the feeling, reframing the comparison, practicing gratitude, or even exploring what that jealousy might be telling you about your own desires. What new perspective can you gain on that situation? And what action, even a small one, can you take to focus on your own growth and well-being, rather than dwelling on someone else's perceived advantage? Take a moment to really consider that before the next time you feel that green-eyed monster stirring within you.